It's about that community. It's about creating a community that works within an organization, like the communities that work outside the organizations in our personal lives. It needs to reflect that, and we need to be able to create a culture where that thrives and people's opinions are valid.
Hello and welcome to Diverse and Inclusive Leaders. This is the show where I speak with the most inspirational and thought-provoking leaders of today and unearth their unique stories of diversity and inclusion to help inspire, educate and motivate others to make the world a better place. Today I am joined by Phil Hoggarth. Now, Phil has a phenomenal career, having been CEO for Communisis and president for OSG Europe. His career spans many blue chip organisations across the world and EMEA. We're going to be talking to Phil today about his journey of how he came to be where he is today, as well as some of the real passion points for his within the diversity and inclusion spectrum, social mobility, parenthood, and also why he is so passionate about really driving forth action as well as being vocal when it comes to all aspects of the diversity, inclusion, belonging and equity spectrum. Welcome to the show, Phil.
Nice to meet you. Thank you for having me. Great to see you.
Thanks so much for being here, and it is wonderful to have you on the show because I know that we've been trying to capture you for a little while to be here, but talk to us a little bit about how you came to be in not only the present role as CEO of Communisis and president for OSG Europe, but also the journey thus far, because there's a number of reasons why you're personally passionate about business for good as well as the employee experience. I wonder, was this a planned journey? Was it something that happened almost serendipitously?
Yeah, and like I say, I'd love to say that it was planned and well thought out in my early life, and I'm living to those firm plans. But that would be that would be a complete lie, unfortunately. I think, I'm from a very northern working class family, the first of the family to go to university, actually. Classical mother and father. Father was a craftsman. Mother gave up work to look after a family at home. Unfortunately, mother was ill for quite a lot of my childhood, which meant that my father, in an era where it wasn't really acceptable, was having to hold down a full-time job, 5-6 days a week, look after a sick wife, and also be mother to a child at school and things like that. And so seeing how he navigated that in a backdrop where that wasn't the norm, certainly wasn't really acceptable in a workplace to be having to balance those things. But reflecting on what a great childhood I still had as a result of that, sort of, I think, really set the foundations for me in as to what's part of my focus now and how I've sort of lived my life. As I sort of mentioned, first one that went to university. I'm actually an engineer by trade, which none of my career has sort of spanned any of those spaces. So much to my parents' dismay, as I left university to go and pursue other things outside of my engineering degree, I sort of found myself in the BPO space, global BPO organizations, running operations, loved the cut and thrust of an ever-changing environment. And that was really my first, I suppose, real exposure to cultural differences, people from different backgrounds, because I was living, working, traveling all around the world, Africa, Europe, Asia, North America, and just meeting people of different backgrounds, different beliefs, different cultures. And that really was just such an exciting melting pot for me as to people's different views on things. And I joined that BPO industry really as a temporary part-time thing. But I say that just the vast change and different influences that brought meant I've spent the last 20 years really in that BPO space, and only really recently moved into a very, I say a very different, a slightly different industry really, more manufacturing based, marketing based, where I'm at now from a Communisis standpoint. But I think that's been a really, the one thing that's ran through all of those journeys is change and cultural differences. It's the one thing that I've really enjoyed throughout all of those experiences. And so I'm here now at Communisis, embarking on another transformational journey, taking an organization from what's been classically manufacturing and point of sale distribution into the sort of the digital era, and trying to bring a much more inclusive and diverse workforce, and bringing the colleagues along on a journey of change and adaptation and growth really. That's kind of where I'm at today. We talked earlier on around, you mentioned parenthood. It's one of the, as I sort of mentioned around my childhood, that as I've got older, I've had a family, and I find myself in the situation now where I'm effectively a single parent who co-parents. I have my children 1 week on, 1 week off, and so for 1 week I am CEO, I'm father, I'm bedtime story reader, I'm knee wiper, cooker, school run activist, all while trying to run a large organization and transform a large organization. So some of the reasons why I wanted to sign up Communisis to the pledge is partly I want to make sure that all the colleagues in our organization have a say and understand their part in the business. I think that's vitally important, that the businesses that we operate and run and service are a true reflection of the communities and world that we serve, and that not only do we have a diverse workforce, but they feel like they have a voice and a say in how we operate as an organization, and the way that we go about doing our business. But I want to make sure as well that we create an environment where people can be themselves and not be afraid to say, I have a life outside of work and I need to find some balance in that. I struggle now as CEO sometimes to find that balance. And so, if I find it difficult being the one who can set the agendas and set these structures for an organization, how hard is it for all the colleagues around the organization to be able to do it in their own way? Whether that be as a true usual normal family unit of two individuals, or whether that's like myself as a single parent or a co-parent organization. How do we help really create an environment where all of those things can be taken into consideration, and the business gets what it needs, but the colleagues and the employees around the world feel like that they get what they need? And that's really important for me to be able to do that. I didn't have that early in my career. I didn't feel I was empowered to have those conversations. And so that's probably what's led me ultimately to be a single co-parent. I put work before family, and that's led me to where I'm at today. And I don't want anybody to feel that there's a choice that needs to be made. I think there is a balance that can be struck, and I think that comes from leaders across the world creating an environment where that is the case and people can be empowered to have those conversations. So it's hugely personal, hugely important to me that we be able to create those sort of work atmospheres. Very, 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 as you can probably tell, as a northern guy, it's difficult to talk sometimes about these sort of things. It's not the norm for a northern lad from the northeast of England to talk about things, but it's hugely important and hugely a passion of mine to be able to create that sort of environment for everybody.
So I love your open, candid nature, and as a fellow northerner, I knew already that we'd end up getting on like a house on fire. But it's really, it's really touching actually to hear about your openness, in particular with some of the early days of childhood that you had. And I know that hard work, resilient nature, we're speaking already here to what is upward social mobility. And,
Yeah.
it is modest of you to kind of talk about some of the corporate world with, the present role. I know you've worked for Capita before, but these are, multi-million pound organizations. And some might say, BPO industry outsourcing, not saying it's not sexy at all, as well as manufacturing, but ultimately there is this injection needed of openness, honesty, candor in order to bring these types of industries in particular into the modern digital world, which, as you rightly say, when it comes to engagement and the employee life cycle now that we're in, with more than, what is it, kind of 5 generations in the workplace, this is needed now so much more than ever before. And one of my questions, which you kind of answered actually in a way, is how much the personal life affected the leader that you are now today. Clearly vulnerability, which you're demonstrating in spades, which I think is really great to see. It seems to be something that we're requiring more and more. Not only is employees in organizations wanting to see our leaders speak up and put their heads above the parapet, but also in the external community, be it kind of ESG, be it governance, stakeholders and customers even, that want to see true authenticity, quote unquote, in their leadership team.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's often overused, but authenticity was exactly what I was thinking before you said it. It's bringing your whole self to work for me. It's the person that you are at home should be the person that you are at work. You shouldn't be afraid to bring any of yourself to work, or feel that you have to hide any of that. And I think you're absolutely right. The business leader that I am today is absolutely driven by those foundations of family life when I was growing up. What's important to me now is as a result of that foundation and the mistakes that I've made throughout my career, right? None of us are perfect. I'm not naive enough to think that, the way I've gone about it is the ideal world. The one thing that I pass on to my children regularly is for them to be themselves. Be themselves now, be themselves at school, and to take that through their career. And I think if it's the one piece of advice I can give to them, and you almost want people to learn from your own mistakes and do things better, that would be it. Don't be afraid to be yourself. Don't be afraid to be who you are and who you really want to be. There's a quote that I always really like, and I think it fits with everything, which was I think it was Confucius that said it: life is really simple, but we insist on making it complicated. And I just think that sums up human nature in everything: personal lives, business lives. And if we can just break it down into its simple forms, I think everything that we're trying to achieve could be so much better and so much easier to achieve if we just think that way. Human nature is we like to make things complicated, though, unfortunately, don't we?
It's definitely the engineer in you, kind of wanting to solve these problems, I think, from the sounds of things. But I'd love to, I'd love to pick further, actually, if I may, into some of the other, the background and the journey, in particular for be it youngsters, be it aspiring leaders who are wanting to be CEO or in kind of leadership. So I know that you've done a lot of work in the hotel trade as well, haven't you? In kind of early life, it certainly was not planned. But is there, would you say there's a defined route specifically? And with the hard-working nature of your family, do you think that led in part to your, almost sounds a bit like workaholicism, which again, I've been there myself, and like you say, you try to not, you learn from the mistakes, you want to pass those on, but is there more around this, this side of things?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, if I look back before I got into corporate life, restaurants and hotels. I worked at a college for autistic adults for a couple of years, and I think that was really that piece between. I've done engineering for 6 or 7 years through college and university, and now realise that's not, it doesn't give me the buzz that I needed to do. And I think some of the next couple of years was around me I think it was a little bit about me finding out about me as a person and what made me tick. I think the engineering route, just the way my mind works, was just an easy way through education. If I'm honest, it was the path of least resistance, as opposed to something that I really could see myself going into. And then I think, the next few years was around just trying to understand that, about what made me tick as a person. And I think what I felt was rather than it being driven by industry or that sort of made me excited, change and transformation and growth were really the three common things that, if I look back at everything I've done, organizations where I've enjoyed it have always had those elements to it. So developing businesses, growing businesses, transforming, whether it be when I started out in basic operations in BPO, and I had a very limited remit. That remit always involves growing, fixing, developing, challenging the status quo, really. And that's been the common theme throughout, I guess. BPO just happened to be a space that has that in spades on a very, it's so fast paced, and something's changing and evolving and developing and growing almost on a daily basis. You either, and it's probably one of those industries where you either thrive or die pretty quickly. It's very quick. And so I think that's why I found a home there for so long, was it just met all of my personal needs, I think. I think, if I was to give some advice to people, is don't be scared to make that change. I found myself for a couple of years wondering exactly what I wanted to do, but I think taking that leap of faith in myself that you would find something that fits how you operate as a person, how your brain functions, what gets you out of bed with a spring in your step in the morning. Don't be afraid to make that change. It doesn't matter how far along in your career you are. I think if you believe in yourself, the right thing will come along. And that's certainly always been the case to me. None of my changes have been planned. I've seen an opportunity to enhance further my personal challenge of change and things like that, and I've gone with it, regardless of what route that's taken me on. Quite frankly, I'm a nightmare at school careers events that I get asked to do sometimes, because I haven't gone through that classical training and then into the role that I was trained to do, and have progressed in that way. I've kind of zigzagged my way through to where I am today based on what excites me more than a sort of stepped plan of I want to be that in 20 or 30 years time, and I want to be a doctor or an engineer or a solicitor or a lawyer or whatever it might be, and that's ultimately what's driven me, really.
You're a glutton for punishment, then. I
am. I thrive on. I love change. I absolutely love change. And that's what gets me really excited, and that's what brought me to Communisis, to the point where it's been a PLC for 10, 12 years in a classical manufacturing space, in a space where we're moving ever more digital and ever more solutions based, in terms of what we need to do. So the opportunity to come in and take that organization on the next stage of its journey and sort of set out a new culture for our colleagues and a new direction for the business, and really sort of transform the underpinnings of the organization so that it's here in 10, 15, 20 years, regardless of whether I'm still in the chair or not, really excites me, hugely exciting. And it's been a fantastic 12 14 months since joining. One of the great things that we've got here is a fantastic set of people who seem to be embracing the change and really running with it. So it's now not just about me and my direct reports. The whole organisation is really sort of grasping it and wanting to be part of it, which is fantastic to see. Absolutely fantastic.
I've seen with a lot of PLCs and other large global organisations that, to use your terminology, thrive or die in an environment that is so ultimately volatile, uncertain, and ever changing, in particular with all of the digital world and future generations of leaders that you spoke to briefly there. Now, I wonder if we can move into talking a little bit about employee experience, because I know this is one of your real areas of passion, and certainly something that I'm guessing you brought in abundance into this role, because I know that it was one of your hallmarks of success back at Capita with one of the big projects that you did there around the, I think it was 150 million revenue a year business piece, and it was all around employee satisfaction across the group. But talk to us a little bit about the needs of employees and how you've seen this start to evolve. So I think that feeds nicely into the juxtaposition of change in the external marketplace and talent.
Yeah, I mean, if you look back, 20 odd years ago and beyond, I think it was thought of and sort of widely perceived that all anybody really wanted was a job security, 9 to 5, paying their thing, and to think that they had a job for the next 10, 20, 30 years. That's changed so much over the last 20 years since I've been there, to the point, we all know now how super competitive the job market is, and people are prepared to take a hit sometimes in salaries now to join an organization where the culture fits what is important to them, so that they feel like it's just the whole job market and the whole business landscape now has gone much further than I just want a good wage and I want to be paid what I think I'm worth. It's gone much more to be like, I want to be treated as an individual. I want my thoughts and my perceptions to be taken into account. I want to feel part of something more than just that, classical cog in a machine, really. And I think those organizations that are really thriving on that are ones that are creating a culture where everybody in the organization really feels like they've got a voice and a say, and can add value beyond just clocking in and clocking out at the end of the day. And I think has anyone really grasped it? No, I think, the big tech businesses of the Googles and the Amazons and the Facebooks sort of with a touch paper for it, I think, around that. There's a different way of engaging employees. There are different ways of bringing them into office spaces. There are different ways for them to sort of to merge that work-life social balance in a different way. But I think nobody really has grasped it and delivered on the perfect solution yet. I think we're all still, the large corporations are still stuck in the old ways of doing things, trying to figure out how do they change the organization's cultures to start and enable it. And where I've seen it work really well, like you said, we create an organization within Capita where, we didn't have the highest paid employees. We didn't have the best office locations. But what we did have was a great feeling of community within that organization, and that manifested itself in some of the best employee NPS in Capita, but also in any organizations I'd seen before. And that was just built out of creating a community. Like I say, it wasn't, we didn't have pool tables and slides in our offices, and we didn't have half the time they weren't even nicely decorated, and they had leaks and they were very underinvested. But what we created was a purpose for our people beyond the fabric of the buildings that they were working in. that made them feel valued and part of an organisation that they had a say in. And I think, you know, that's, if there's one thing that I want to create as a legacy for Communisis, is to be able to create something similar where all of our colleagues feel part of not just a business, but a community where, you know, we're creating an environment for growth and success for our people and the communities that we surround, as well as our shareholders and our owner structure. You know, it's kind of that purpose beyond profit piece, right? And how do you bring that to life for the colleagues? And that's what certainly, you know, myself and Ricky, who I know you've met, who has the grandiose title of sort of diversity inclusion, but really that's about him helping challenge the organization to make sure we're not just about profit, we're not just about serving our customers, but it's about how do we serve our colleagues, how do we serve the communities that we're surrounded by, because inevitably that drives ultimately what businesses need, which is profitable growth, happy clients, all of those good things that make us a long-standing and longevity in terms of the business side of things, is driven by our core assets, which is our people, right? So, and that's why it's so important to me. It's why I get so passionate about it, as you and I have discovered as we've been talking through.
It resonates such a lot. I mean, and this is the perfect situation. Ultimately, is purpose before profit, yet also everyone wins. Now, if I am to be a little provocative, if I may, for those kind of, you know, naysayers as it were, who might be listening and thinking, yeah, well, that's the perfect situation. We all want to have purpose here, and we want to make sure that comes before profit. But when you've got limited budgets, the $1 million question is how did you do this in Capita, and how are you doing it in Communisis to build what is this, you know, loyal following of brilliant people that are there because they care so much about the organization? Because that's the dream, right?
It is, and look, there's no silver bullet to this, right? You know, and you know, for anyone who's worked in the type of industry I'm in now, and certainly BPO, you know, margins are not the greatest in those industries. So a high abundance of cash to throw at these things, it isn't there, and nor will it ever be. But I think that's the great thing about the sort of the approach to this, is it's not about throwing money at things. It's just about treating people with the sort of respect that they deserve, right? I used to have an old boss that used to say to me, never treat anyone in your organization like you wouldn't treat your nana. And for those who are not know, the nana is a grandmother and which I always reflected on. But if you boil it down, you know, when you think about how you are with your grandma and your grandparents, you know, you treat them with love and respect that they deserve as an organ. But actually, you want them to be part of the family. And actually, what we're trying to create in an organisation, I think that is successful, is the feeling that it's not, you know, it's beyond employees and it's employed colleagues. I go back to this, trying to create a feeling of community, a feeling of wanting to be part of something that is greater than the perceived 9 to 5 that you are contracted to do. What are we contracted to do in that 9 to 5 period, or whatever period of time that you're contracted to do? Is making them feel that there's a purpose beyond just that for them, and that they can have a say and an impact beyond that day-to-day 9 to 5. And it's not driven by money, it's driven by good leadership. And that's not my good leadership, that's the managers throughout the organization leading by example and and drawing people into and making people feel like they want to be part of the solution, right? As I mentioned before, we're in a large transformation piece here at Communisis, and what we're trying to do is, rather than people feel like change is being done to them, that they're part of deciding what that change is and how we go about doing it. So we can set the vision and strategy of where we want to get to, and yes, we've all got ideas about how we want to get there, but actually involving everybody in that, and how do we think global and act local, is that, how do we get everybody as part of that? That's what really drives that culture and that community. Once you've cracked that nut, that then is what drives to the NPS scores of people feeling like they want to be part of the organization. And then the peripherals around the outside of things that we'd all love to do, and put better breakout areas in and make the car parks easier to do. All of those things really become an issue because they don't feel part of something bigger. So as soon as you fix the feeling part of something bigger, the other things, which is where you need the spare cash to make things better, suddenly aren't as important, and therefore people aren't looking to leave for the next 50 pence an hour, or so that finding that balance of work-life balance, part of the answer, not being told what to do. That's how I believe you drive that community and drive that piece. It's not about cash. It's not about money. None of the organizations I've worked in have had free-flowing cash to throw at these things, which has been done through the people and the managers living it on a day-to-day basis. And it takes time. This is not an overnight thing. This is, months and years of saying stuff, acting it out, being seen to be living by those values, and suddenly people start to understand that it's not just rhetoric. And so I'd love to say, there's a silver bullet that will fix it overnight, but there isn't. It's just perseverance and good managers within the organisation that believe in it as well, and people then just seeing it and believe, and then starting to believe it, because we're all skeptics, right, at heart. We've all been there. We've all heard it, and we've all, oh, here we go, there's another one.
Trying not to be a northern cynic here, Phil. I'm trying not to, but I'm like, I've got to be able to disagree with Phil on something. So I'm here nodding along, going, absolutely, this is absolutely it. And it's like, culture, it's living, it's breathing, it's sleeping, it's like diversity and inclusion and belonging and equity and all of the other peripheral things that span off those different areas. Because of course there's lots of diversities within diversities, and people say, well, how come fix the diversity issue that we have? And I always say, well, it's not an issue. It is something that, first of all, we want to live and breathe and sleep and eat it and make it part of the culture. Yeah. But we would never come in and say, hey, do you know what? That's the solution. Sticky plaster on, off we go. Actually, it's a constantly evolving journey that we are forever on, a lifelong journey of learning that we.
Absolutely, you and I can't sit here hand on heart and say that there's an end state, because that end state will always be moved back. You'll reach a point, and then there'll be more to do. There'll be more things to drive forward. It's an interesting concept that everyone just thinks that we get a few different genders, we get a few different backgrounds together, and we get then everything's solved. I've fulfilled my diversity inclusion piece, because look, I've got some women over here, and I've got some people from different ethnic backgrounds over there, and haven't we done a great job? And it's not about that for me. It's just about, and I keep using the term, it's about that community. It's about creating a community that works within an organization, like the communities that work outside the organizations in our personal lives, it needs to reflect that. And we need to be able to create a culture where that thrives and people's opinions are valid. And you're right, no organization can come in and fix that overnight. That is a journey of little tiny steps and little bites of the cake to start and get the momentum. And then as the momentum goes, then you really start and see some large step changes. But getting that little snowball at the top of the hill moving is a bloody tricky feat often, because you're fighting against skepticism, you're fighting against, oh God, different person saying rubbish coming out of their mouth, the proof is in the pudding, all that. So you've got to really get through all of that. So it does start slowly, but I think once you get the momentum, actually at that point, it really does gather in pace and speed then in an organization. It's just it's having the will to start pushing and fight through those early stages of, distrust and skepticism to then really start and make an impact. You just got to go through it.
Snowball effect is a great analogy, and that is very much, well, I think it feeds in perfectly actually to the CEO activist, quote unquote, and obviously absolutely thrilled that you have been one of our first signatories to sign the pledge. But reason being, and those that are listening, reason being, around this snowball analogy and starting at the top is it is proven. I'm not saying, so often get this, oh, you're saying that, grassroots is not as important. Not saying that, saying that when we see visibly our leaders, as CEOs and other executives who are, day after day putting their head above the parapet, and rightly so, should be held accountable. Ultimately, the trickle effect is far, far quicker when you're rolling that snowball off the top of the mountain. It's not about the level necessarily of seniority, but ultimately it is about the effect that then has, and this, the trickle effect that we often call it, that safe space, driving that feeling of being able to truly speak out. If your boss, your line manager, whoever you might be within an organization, is not being quite as open or candid or vulnerable, or wants to sit there and say everything is perfect, as opposed to actually, hey, I've had these personal struggles when I was, younger, and so on and so forth. Well, it is that safe bubble and capsule almost that is just then populating the rest of the organization. You can just see how much it flourishes and it thrives, and people feel they can relate to that. And that's, that's great as well when it comes to, well, the S from ESG ultimately, externally too.
Yeah, absolutely. And to the phrase you used, that authentic leadership, I think that's where the authenticity comes from, is that people in the organization can see you as a human being, not a figurehead. And that you're vulnerable and that you have your weaknesses and, your foibles but I think the key thing to getting people to truly believe into it is that they see you believing. Otherwise it's doomed to fail. I could put a load of initiatives out into an organization, but if I don't believe in it truly myself, or at least don't believe in the way that we're doing it, it's just never going to get its traction, because it doesn't come across as authentic. It just comes across as he's another corporate rollout from someone who won't be here in 10 years time or 5 years time or whatever. We'll wait for somebody else to come around. They'll have a different idea, and you just move on. So you end up just stagnated as an organization because nobody believes in it, right? Because ultimately, in reality, the person at the top doesn't believe in it. And that's where the authentic leadership comes in. Got to really believe in what you're doing and why you're doing it. And then everybody else slowly starts to see, okay, this has got legs because this person and the people around him are living and breathing it and really, really want it to happen. Oh, I can get on board with that. I believe in it myself. I've been part of the journey, again, back to the point of bringing the colleagues in on some of those How do we bring it to life? How do we get it there? What do we need to do? That's what gets that snowball moving, right? And what keeps it going. You know, if this sort of thing should go on long after I leave, right? The culture shouldn't just be driven by one individual. It should be there regardless of whether me, my management team, whoever leaves. It should be something that just becomes part of the DNA of the organization.
It's that lasting legacy for future generations of leaders, to your point. And Phil, honestly, you've articulated it so well. And I know you earlier said, you know, authenticity, and I agree, authenticity is a word that is completely overused, but the true authenticity of living, breathing, speaking, doing those values that we talk about so much, and being truly accountable, whilst also knowing that all of us are fallible. You know, no one is perfect, and that is what people relate to. Is, you know, often the trip ups and the failures, more often even than the wins, because they know that is true, and that is ultimately real.
But that, you know, Joe, what's made all of us what we are today, we're all just a byproduct of the failures that we've made throughout life, right? You know, it's just how you react and respond to those, right? You know, for anyone to feel like they've got to hide that's the bit that needs addressing, right? Because we're all only the way we are now because of the failures that our parents have made and we've made, and that's how we evolve and learn. And what we try and do is make sure our children don't make some of the ones that we've done, and they'll make their own. But that's how people and society and businesses evolve. You know, we need to embrace that and not be afraid to share it and see it as a positive thing.
Phil, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. I knew when we started talking that the only issue would be running out of time, and the fact that we may need to put in part 2 to discuss more around other subjects around CEO activism, employee engagement, and social mobility, which have been some of the many rich subjects that we have covered today. And I'll do my best to do a quick summary here, but I'm like, oh my goodness, where do I start? I love Northerners, is what I'll say. I love Northerners. I love the candid honesty and vulnerability that you brought. Some of the learning lessons that I have had, certainly I was about to, embark on a journey of parenthood myself, are how to find this balance, or again, I know balance, perhaps sometimes a twee word, but having that capability to prioritize ultimately is some of the things that I've really learned from this podcast. Being able to speak up and deal with some of those struggles and learn from life lessons, because truly being open within an environment that ultimately we spend more time at than we do with our friends, family, and loved ones. It is critical that we take the learnings from personal life into business and back the other way, because there is, a far more unique juxtaposition between the two than there once was 10, 20 years ago. This is a fast-paced and modern world. I particularly loved the pieces that we discussed around engagement. I think that's something that all leaders, organizations can certainly take from. And again, one that resonated a lot with me, especially when I think of early businesses that I've started and run, broken holes in the wall, thinking, yes, made it into this kind of, into an office, into a real space that we're paying rent on. Like you talked about, Phil, I just, being able to create that sense of camaraderie between people, and that there is a greater purpose beyond ultimately profit. And that is, it's the solution focus that I think, many can take. But, to your point, it's not a one silver bullet situation, nor will it ever be. This is a growing, living, breathing, sleeping thing. And my favorite quote, which, goodness, this has got to go into a quote, perhaps as our teaser, is never treat anyone in your organization as you would, as well as your nana, I think it was, or words to those effect. I think that's just a fantastic one there. So thank you so much for that, Phil. And my name is Leila Mackenzie-Gallis. You've been listening to Diverse Inclusive Leaders podcast with Phil Hoggarth from Communisis. If you've been affected by anything from today's show, do make sure you check out the show notes or you reach out to one of the team. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, on the Dial Global Network app in the App Store, and we'll put all of the learning links in there from, so you can get in touch and follow Phil on LinkedIn or one of the other social profiles, or you can re-listen at your leisure. Accessibility as well, if you like to view the transcripts, that's no problem at all. But until next week, thank you so much, and take care for now.